Have you ever stopped to think about what it really costs to make something? You know, like a smartphone, or a custom piece of furniture, or even just a can of soda? Well, the answer is way more complex and, frankly, way more fascinating than you might think. So today, we're going to dive in and unpack the different ways businesses figure out the true hidden price tag of their products.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll talk about the big problem every business has to solve. Then we'll look at the two classic ways of thinking about costs before we kind of zoom out to see the bigger picture. After that, we'll get right to the heart of the matter, what I like to call the overhead puzzle. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by figuring out how to pick the right tool for the job.
All right, let's jump right in with section one. We're talking about the central challenge every manufacturing business faces, the costing conundrum.
Seems like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? I mean, you just add up the cost of the parts and the labor, right? But what about the rent for the factory? The electricity that keeps the lights on and the machines running? The salary of the supervisors walking the floor? See, this is where it gets really tricky, and it's where the real story of cost actually begins.
To really get this, we need to split all those costs into two main buckets. In the first bucket, you've got your direct costs. These are the easy ones, the no-brainers. The wood for a table, the steel for a car, the wages you pay the person who is physically putting the thing together. But then you've got the other bucket, the indirect costs. You might also hear this called manufacturing overhead. And these are the really tough ones. How much of the factory's electric bill belongs to one single t-shirt? That right there is the conundrum.
So how do we even begin to solve this mess? Well, accountants have come up with two fundamental systems, and it all depends on what you're making. Let's take a look at how these two approaches build a foundation for everything else.
So you've basically got two foundational solutions. On one hand, there's job order costing. This is perfect for unique, one-of-a-kind items. If you're building a custom super yacht for a client, you need to track every single screw, every hour of labor specifically for that one job. But on the other hand, you've got process costing. This is for the complete opposite situation. When you're churning out millions of identical bottles of soda, you don't care about the cost of one specific bottle. You just average the costs over the entire massive production run.
This little flowchart here shows the job order system in action. See how all the costs, the materials, the labor, and yeah, a slice of that tricky overhead, are all funneled directly into one bucket for one specific job. It's kind of like keeping a separate, super detailed expense report for every single project you work on. And now, look at the contrast with process costing. You see the difference, right? The costs aren't flowing to a specific job anymore. Instead, they're getting pooled into different departments. Maybe Department A is for mixing, and Department B is for bottling. The costs just pile up at each stage, and then they're averaged across the thousands and thousands of units that pass through. It's all about the flow and the average, not the individual item. Okay, but what if the factory floor is only part of the story? I mean, what if a huge chunk of a product's cost happens before it's even made? Let's zoom out and look at a system that tracks costs from the very first brainstorm all the way to the final customer service call. This brings us to something called life cycle costing. And the whole idea here is that to really know if a product is profitable, you have to look at the entire picture. It crucially includes those massive costs of research and design that happen before the product even exists, and all the marketing and service costs that happen after it's sold. This value chain diagram shows it perfectly. You've got upstream costs, that's all the investment in R&D and design before a single unit is even made. And then you have downstream costs, everything it takes to market, sell, and support the product. You know, a lot of traditional costing systems, they only focus on that box in the middle, manufacturing. But life cycle costing, it looks at all five. And why is this so important? Well, think about it. A product could look super profitable on the factory floor, but be a total money loser once you factor in the millions you spent on R&D and advertising to get it off the ground. This system forces managers to make much smarter decisions about which big projects are truly worth that long-term investment. Okay, now for the main event. Let's really tackle that huge, thorny problem of indirect costs, that overhead, and look at a pretty revolutionary system that was designed to solve it. So to understand the solution, we first need to understand the problem, and it has a fantastic name, peanut butter costing. And yep, it's exactly what it sounds like. You take your big bucket of overhead costs, rent, utilities, salaries, and you just spread it evenly across all your products. You know, like spreading peanut butter on a loaf of bread. The problem, of course, is that some products might be way more complex and resource hungry than others, but they're all getting the same dollop of cost. Let's look at a real-world example from our source material to see how dangerous this can be. So, using a traditional system, which is basically peanut butter costing, this company's books showed they were making a pretty comfortable profit of $17.81 on every single unit of both product A and product B. Everything looks great, right? They're making money on both.
But here's the catch. Some sharp accountants dug a little deeper, and they realized what was really going on. Because they made tons and tons of product A, its profits were totally hiding the true costs of the much smaller, more complicated production run of product B. This is called product cost cross-subsidization, and it is an incredibly dangerous blind spot for a company to have. And here it is, the aha moment. By switching to a much more precise method called activity-based costing, or ABC for short, they allocated costs based on what actually caused them. Things like how many times you have to set up the production line. And the result? Whoa. Product A was actually more profitable than they thought, but they were losing a shocking $64 on every single unit of product B they sold.
This slide really shows the why behind that incredible discovery. Look at the traditional system on the left. It's simple, right? One big bucket of overhead, one single way to spread it around. But now look at the ABC system on the right. It's a little more complex, sure, but it's way more accurate. It breaks that overhead down into specific activities, like product design, machine setup, or customer service, and then it carefully traces those costs to the products that are actually using them. So the takeaway here is absolutely huge. Activity-based costing gives managers the true story, and when they're armed with this accurate data, they can make critical decisions. Should they raise the price of product B? Can they find a way to make it more efficiently? Or should they just stop making it altogether? Without ABC, they wouldn't have even known there was a problem to fix.
So we've walked through 4 really powerful systems, and each one has its own strengths. The natural question then is, well, how do you know which one to use? And really, it all comes down to picking the right tool for the job.
Let's just put it all together in one simple chart. If you're making custom yachts, you're going to use job order. If you're making soda, process costing is your friend. If you're developing a new pharmaceutical drug with years and years of R&D ahead of it, you absolutely need life cycle costing to see the whole picture. And if your factory is complex with a ton of overhead costs, ABC is pretty much essential to get an accurate read on your true costs.
And that brings us to our final thought. A costing system isn't just some boring accounting exercise. It is the lens through which a company sees itself. It dictates your prices, it guides your product decisions, and ultimately it shapes your entire business strategy. So the most important question any leader should be asking is this: is our costing system giving us a clear picture, or is it leading us completely astray? Is it telling us the truth?